So let's just start off with why softball? I mean, was this a family thing? Um, how did you get into the sport?
Yeah, so my dad played in college and growing up, and I guess so did my mom a little bit. And so it was the first sport that I ever picked up, that and soccer. I kind of was just thrown into it at the age of like 5 with t-ball and everything, and I kind of just continued to grow from there. But it was really kind of a passion that I shared with my dad, and I got to grow with him through this process. So that's kind of why I chose it.
And then of all the positions on the field, why pitcher?
So originally it's because I was coach's kid. I was kind of thrown into it when I was around 9 or 10 years old, and I think it just kind of stuck. We kind of realized that I wasn't half bad at it, and kind of started to develop a little bit more. And just after a few lessons and after like a few years went by, we kind of realized, oh, this is something I could do in college. This is something that I could actually be good at, and so I stuck with it, and it became my favorite position out of all of them.
At what point did you make the switch? What were you playing before? And then, I mean, what is the normal age to switch from a fielding position to pitcher?
Yeah, so for me, it happened when I was about 10 years old. I still played first base, a little bit of outfield while pitching. Then it kind of, when I started travel ball around the age of 12 or 14, was when I kind of just was a pitcher. It was what I was best at. And I kind of didn't like any other position after that. That might sound bad, but no, at the age of 14 is when I started pitching only.
So that same year, I saw that you sustained a pretty serious injury.
Yes.
Can we talk about that?
Yes, of course. It's actually 6 years ago next week. So, you know,
Happy anniversary, I guess.
thank you. So 6 years ago, I was 14 years old and was pitching in a game up in Canada, which the only relevant piece to that is we were pitching 3 feet closer than we would have in the States. And I sustained a hit to the side of my head while pitching, like a line drive was hit back at me. Um, that's where I suffered a skull fracture and a brain bleed. I was hospitalized and kept for observation. Physically, I ended up being okay pretty like immediately after, but I was released 24 hours later. Everyone on the outside saw that I was fine. But yeah, over the next few months, I kind of started to develop PTSD and I had no clue what it was. I had no idea what trauma was. And it was a really scary experience for me. Because I don't think anyone around me knew about it either, knew how to handle the situation I was in, or knew that I was struggling in general. Um, but yeah, that was really hard. That was really hard for me. The PTSD part was really hard for me to grow out of, and I still haven't grown out of it since.
Yeah, I mean, I read that you had been conscious the entire time.
Yeah. So I
I
remember
mean,
it all.
that's incredible. I mean, at 14, you're really kind of just starting the serious part of potentially doing the sport in college, whatever the sport may be. I mean, how did that, I mean, you were playing travel ball, so you obviously were serious about your sport.
Yeah.
How did that injury so early on translate into recruiting and going to college somewhere to play?
Yeah. It was a big thing for me because around the age of 14, I was getting recruited by a few Power Five schools, which was this was during the time with softball where kids are getting recruited straight freshman year of high school, even eighth grade, seventh grade, they were like committing to play college softball. And so that was kind of the age that I was at looking at colleges. And then after my accident happened, um, I kind of took a decline as a pitcher a little bit. I started to flinch when I pitch, meaning I, it's hard to explain, but all the energy that I like built up trying to, when I pitch would like fall back. And so I lost speed, I lost spin. I was mortified to pitch. So not as confident led to not being as good, which was very hard for me to wrap my head around. Still had some interest with some bigger schools until I was 17, I decided to come play for the University of San Diego. It had everything that I was hoping it would offer. The best location ever to help pay for my education, a great education in that, and a really cool opportunity to play. Obviously, it wasn't the route that I intended to take. Um, but I can say looking back at it, I'm glad I took that route. But no, it definitely impacted my recruiting process.
And you had also talked about panic attacks while you were pitching. I mean, every once in a while, I will talk to an athlete who has in-game panic attacks, and they are debilitating.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine what you were going through at 14, 15, 16.
Yeah. So they did start when I was around 15 years old and when I was in travel ball. And my coaches at the time, I don't think they really understood what panic attacks were and how it would affect me and like how what they said could affect me. Because I remember the year after it happened, we were like, it was a live game situation. It was at practice. Um, but I started like I had a panic attack and I didn't know what a panic attack was. So I had like, sense of impending doom, like everything was crashing down. My heart rate was elevated super fast, palms were sweating, hyperventilating, crying uncontrollably. And I didn't have the support that I needed at all. And it was hard because no one around me, none of my teammates even knew. Um, and since we were all so young, it was like new for everyone. But no, it still happens. It happens with certain triggers for me. It happens whenever a ball gets hit like back at me, but it also happens if like say a teammate gets hit. Like it happened this past spring where one of my teammates was hit in the face, and I immediately had a panic attack. And the coaches and my teammates now we have like a response program for me, kind of with the step by step on how to calm me back down, making sure that everyone's okay, and making sure that I have the support that I need, which I can tell you now has the world of difference. The way it's incredible the way the first one is handled from say my last. I felt the support, I've felt the love, the care, everything that I've needed from my coaches and from my teammates here. It's been an incredible experience.
Who put together that response plan?
So
And
I,
what was the process like before?
yeah. So before it was kind of I would just cry it out and like hope for the best. I was super anxious after. Um, I would get super dizzy after, like I'd have a panic attack, and it would take me about an hour or two to recover from one. And so it happened my freshman year of college, and my coaches were aware, and so they told me to. It was be in my best interest to go see our sports psych on campus, and so we started doing that. And with her help, with my athletic trainer's help, and sitting down with my coaches, we were able to kind of develop a plan that would able to ground me in the moment and help me kind of snap out of this panic attack, because it's kind of like that false alarm system that like your body's telling you you're in danger when in reality it's not. So it's kind of like trying to trick that. And we use tons of different grounding techniques. They get me away from the field at all costs. Like they take me out of the environment that I was in that put me in that position, and they won't let me come back until like I'm okay, which I wish would have done my entire journey.
What kind of psych support does San Diego provide for student athletes?
Yeah, so right now we have 3 sports psychs on campus. We have a licensed psychiatrist, I think it's a familial therapist, and I 90% sure that we are now adding an ED specialist to our staff, which I'm super excited about. I think it's an incredible resource, as well as we do have our like counseling center on campus. But after speaking with a lot of friends from other like campuses, I didn't realize how many resources we have compared to them.
Wow, that's great then.
Yeah, kind of
Let's talk
cool.
about the few days after your accident. Who are you talking to? What did your life look like? How long were you in the hospital?
So I was in the hospital for about 24 hours. Um, the neurologist, the neurosurgeon at that hospital, at the children's hospital I was at, told me that nothing was getting worse and that I could leave with, I could leave and I would be okay. Um, and I was okay. I think I returned because we were playing in a tournament. So I went back and kind of watched my team and was just around my team a little bit. So that was the few days after. I would get a few headaches, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound. I ended up losing hearing in my right ear a little bit from it, from I think the impact of it. Um, but then I kind of went on like nothing happened. I don't think I really went to go get cleared from a doctor back at home because there was a little gray area there. So a week later, I started pitching again, this time with a face mask. um, and I played in our nationals tournament 2 weeks later. Hindsight 2020, probably not the best decision. But in the moment, I wasn't quitting and I wasn't backing down and I had to play. So the people around me let me.
Yikes.
A little bit.
Who first defined PTSD to you? And in that moment, did you go, this may be applicable?
um, so it was, I think, 2 or 3 years after, because I had never really known what it was. You hear about it, you think, people in the army, people in the Navy, like that's where you think PTSD. And so I didn't really think it could apply to me when I heard it, you know, just in general. Um, and then I think I was struggling so hard going into COVID that one of my, I can't remember who it was. I don't know if it was a travel ball coach or it was when I got to college, them kind of being like, it sounds like what you're dealing with is PTSD. And after kind of going through, it was like, to my own research, I want to be a doctor one day. So I have to do my research a little bit. Um, and I was like reading into PTSD. I'm like, wait, I could actually have this. This actually could be the reason why I'm acting the way I'm acting, why I'm having these panic attacks. And I don't think I could be able to name that they were panic attacks either. I just thought I was overreacting the entire time. But I don't think it was until college that I got officially diagnosed with PTSD where I realized, yeah, no, you definitely have this. And this is definitely something we're going to have to get through.
Speaking of official diagnoses, that kind of spiraled into anxiety, depression, and an eating disorder.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean, can you talk me kind of through that period of your life and what it looked like?
yes. Yeah, of course. So looking back at my childhood and in my life, I can say that I was a very anxious child. I didn't know what anxiety was either, so I thought this all was normal. But after being diagnosed with PTSD, the year following was pretty rough. I don't think it had anything to do with that diagnosis, but coming to college, I realized how bad my anxiety was. If I couldn't speak to groups of people, even if it was my teammates, I was mortified to speak. I would plan out what I was going to say in my head while like everyone else was talking so that I wouldn't screw it up and embarrass myself, or so I thought, embarrass myself. In class, I would never raise my hands even when I knew the answer. Um, Always an overwhelming sense of anxiety. Like I had to be on time. I had to be perfect. I had to be perfect in softball. I had to be perfect in school, maintain that GPA that I strive so hard to achieve. I had this overwhelming sense of pressure and anxiety from that. And I think that kind of led into depression for me. Um, and what's really wild about depression in my experience with it is even I can't remember the pain I was in. I look back and I read kind of the journal entries that I was writing at that time, and I was in serious pain. I was numb. It was a very, very dark place for me, but I can't even imagine myself being back there right now, or even when they're like I'm not in a like depressive episode. Like I can't feel that anymore, which is wild to even think about. But for me, I have to be in control. Have to be. That's why I'm always so anxious. And so the only thing I control at that time of my life was what I ate. And that spiral, that perfectionist like ideology, as well as the ability to control everything that I do, um, kind of led to a pretty big eating disorder. And it was a mix of bulimia and anorexia, which ended up being diagnosed, I think, 2 years ago now. But I lost substantial weight and was not performing as a player at all. And it really took a toll on my performance as an athlete. And so that was my sophomore year of college, and it kind of all came crashing down as there was a presentation on mental health for our athletes in November of my sophomore year. And I think I had been having like suicidal ideation for a little bit of time because all of it was extremely overwhelming and I wasn't happy anymore. Um, but after that day, I broke down to some of the closest people to me and to one of my coaches. And in that moment, that was what saved me. And they were able to help me get the support that I needed. My coaches allowed me to take weeks off softball to kind of be able to focus on myself and get back to where I needed to be, um, which was more than I could have ever asked for. Um, so for how horrible the situation was, it ended up being they had the perfect response to it. But that was about that little time period in my life.
When you were struggling with the disordered eating, were athletic trainers picking up on this? I mean, did you have a team nutritionist that was watching caloric intake?
No, one of the big things with me is watching calorie intake for me and being like tracking that does a number to my head. I think that's where it kind of started for me was like intake of calories and being able to track that. It really like I strive to maintain under a certain amount. And if I went over, it was the end of the world for me in that day. My coaches first picked up on it when during our fit test, I couldn't complete our fit test and I passed out after from being malnourished. And so they kind of asked what was going on. And I sat down with my athletic trainer and kind of told her what all was happening. And she was able to, like, there was a certain protocol that I had to follow to kind of get back and be able to play. And that was meeting with a psychologist, a nutritionist, as well as like your primary care doctor, kind of making sure that everything's getting back to normal and kind of getting you on track. So I did have a team that was put together that monitored not what I did, but making sure that I was on the right track with everything.
It sounds like San Diego provided you with a lot of support
They did.
from a variety of different perspectives and techniques. And I mean, do you think that other schools have that many people dedicated to student success?
Yeah, I don't know. One thing I think a lot of people do, I'm not exactly sure. Probably not as many. But the one thing that I realized is I was essentially not in a bad way, but I was essentially forced to seek help. It wasn't out of my own free will, which I think is the kind of the gap that we see with college athletics is the resources most of the times are available. We just don't know about them to the extent to which we should, or we don't feel comfortable enough to go seek that help on our own. So I was fortunate enough to be kind of, given the nice little nudge, kind of pushed through the doors of the people that were able to help me. Um, but one of the big issues that we face in college athletics is kind of the stigma around mental health in athletics for sure, because that's what stops us all from wanting to seek help in general.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a completely different scenario when you come up on the radar of your athletic trainer or your nutritionist or your coach as opposed to fighting it internally.
Yeah, I think it is a lot different, and it's something that I haven't had the opportunity yet to go like on my own and seek help. Um, because I think I was such at a low point in my life that I did a very bad job of hiding it, and hiding that I was struggling. I think growing up, I did a really good job of hiding like what I was feeling. And I think a lot of athletes are really good at hiding what they're feeling, hiding all the emotions, hiding what they're struggling with. And that's the type of trying to help get resources to those types of people, I think is the gap that we're trying to bridge.
Where do you think you'd be if someone else hadn't have stepped in?
I don't think I'd be here. I don't think I'd be alive. Um, I overthink a lot too. And so I get in my head. And if I didn't have the support or the sense of belonging or sense of realizing it was okay to feel this way and it was normal to feel this way and kind of normal to go through these emotions and feelings that I have and someone like a teammate has the same issues. I didn't know a teammate would have the same issues going into my freshman year of college. Now, as a senior, I know that a lot of my teammates struggle from day-to-day tasks, and I know that they're going through something so similar. Um, and that like type of support has kind of kept me alive. But if I was on my own throughout this whole process, I wouldn't be here.
Well, I'm glad that you are.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Speaking of just initiatives that potentially save lives. I mean, I've seen that you've been talking with Helinski's Hope, and you founded this clothing situation that like is really cool. I looked into it. I love it. Um, what's the impact of not just school specific outreach programs like that, but I mean, we're talking national
Yeah.
initiatives.
Yeah. So I was kind of talking to my mom about this a little bit ago, and we were talking about how I never had the support at a young age and how she, as a parent, had no clue what was going on with me. And she was, she didn't know that I needed help. And if she knew that I needed help, of course she would have been there to support me. But she didn't know because at that time that I like was hiding it. And I think we've seen, I know in my community back at home, we've seen, unfortunately, we've lost a few of our athletes to suicide recently in high school. And that's not something I feel like high schoolers should even have to think about at all. Um, and so, kind of when I started this project, I know I didn't have the time to do something super big. I'm really busy as it is. And I was working with a nonprofit originally called Resilience Rally. I still work with them. They're wonderful. They provide free and affordable therapy to anyone who can need it, which is absolutely incredible. But I was working with them and one of the projects that we were working on, I was reaching out to different companies, hoping to help like seek sponsorships, stuff like that. And I came across this company called Shine the Light On. They're based out of Toronto, up in Canada. And it was something for something so unrelated. And he came back and talked to me. He was like, hey, we have this program that you can design like a clothing line if you'd like to. We'd only ask if you just donate some of it to charity. And I was like, this is incredible. I don't know, I've always had a little bit of a niche for stuff like that. And I'm like, yes, of course. And my biggest thing is I wanted most of it to be donated. And so we were able to donate 60%. And so far, we've raised about $4,000 for these nonprofits, which is extremely exciting. But yeah, we support Resilience Rally, Morgan's Message, The Hidden Opponent, Helinski's Hope, Katie's Save, and Let's Get Real About student athlete mental health. And it's just been an incredible experience and being able to help other people.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the words I wish I'd heard. I mean, how did that name come about? How did the process of figuring out what you were going to put on this apparel come to fruition? I
Yeah.
love the name, by the way.
Thank you. So I started journaling throughout this whole process when I was a freshman in college. And
hello, I don't think we've been introduced.
Whoops.
Sorry.
That was on my end.
Yeah, so I started journaling when I was a freshman in college, and I was reflecting one day over it, and I realized that there's a lot of things that I wish people had told me. There was a lot of words I legit wish that I had heard at a younger age, and I realized that if someone were to have told me just in a day-to-day setting how much better my day would have been, or how much more sense of belonging that I would have and feel knowing that I wasn't alone. That was the biggest thing, was the sense of loneliness. And I think that's when we talk about mental health, mental wellness, and essentially like mental illness, one of the common denominators I found is a sense of feeling alone and not feeling that anyone you know is going through it, but being able to see words that maybe you're not hearing all the time. And like the main one for me was that I'm so proud of you. Like just seeing that, just being like, I'm alive today. I woke up today. I'm proud of myself that I got up today. And that was a big thing for me throughout the journey. And I think the reason I started it was on that worst day, the day after One of my teammates and my best friend sent me a text message that said, "The world is so happy you're alive today." And God, I broke down. I absolutely broke down. It was after we were lifting for softball, and I had realized how much words matter and how much things that one individual can say. Sometimes we can't do all that much, but knowing when someone's struggling that you're not alone is huge. And people that are struggling with the silent battle and not ready to, they're not in that point of their life to be able to share what they're going through or be able to seek help quite yet, kind of helping them realize that they're not alone either in whatever battle they're fighting.
I mean, I feel like team sport athletes handle mental health struggles so differently than individual athletes. And then even within team sport athletes, different positions handle these struggles differently. I mean, I've talked to goalies, I've talked to pitchers, and I've also talked to outfielders. And I mean, they're just different in the way that they approach things. And I don't know if certain characteristics or character traits from childhood make you go toward the outfield or go toward the mound, but I just think that it's interesting. And also when you were talking about the fact that you have teammates who are also going through these things, but you didn't talk to them about it. I mean, why?
I believe, like we all know, that there's this stigma within mental health that it honestly, if we struggle with our mental health, then we are weak. We are not going to get the job done. And I know coaches in the past, I don't think I've experienced it specifically, but if someone has struggled with mental health and they're not at their A game, they're not going to be in the starting lineup. And as I'm pretty sure most of us athletes are, we're all perfectionists. We want to be able to play. We want to be able to do the best we can. And nothing's going to risk that. I'm like, probably in the beginning, I wasn't going to risk losing playing time. I wasn't going to risk not going to be able to pitch. I wasn't going to risk that. And if that meant me staying silent and that meant me not speaking up and kind of just pushing through, like, when we have a physical injury that we kind of want to push through, it's very similar. And we decide to push through because we don't want to lose our starting position. We don't want to lose playing time. We don't want to be perceived as lesser than or weak than our other teammates.
When you were met with a coaching staff and a support staff that handled it completely differently than what you were anticipating, how did that go over?
So I was kind of able to, it's kind of a funny story because when I was struggling around the first time my freshman year, I called a meeting with my coach, who was a first time head coach. And I've never had an athlete call a meeting with me. And I think she essentially thought that I was going to quit or something. So she was a little nervous, but I kind of started talking to her about what I was going through and the thoughts and feelings that I was having. And over that period of time throughout my freshman, sophomore, junior year, they were kind of with me through that process. They kind of grew with me. Because what's something really cool about our coaching staff is I think they're the youngest coaching staff in Division I for softball, which is absolutely incredible. They're incredible humans. But for the first time ever, I felt support from a coaching staff. And my pitching coach at the time, she had struggled herself with her mental health. And so she made it easy to talk about. She allowed me to talk about it. And that was the first time that I had been able to talk about it with someone of an authority figure to me and it be okay. And so she would kind of coach me in what to say to my head coach because I would get a little bit nervous and kind of go about the ways of how to talk about it. And we all grew together throughout that process. And I think now our coaching staff is very in tune to allowing us to focus on our mental health, which is way better than I could have ever hoped for, because I know some coaches are not like that.
So in the upper corner, you'll see that we now have a timer.
Yeah.
When time goes down, we're not ending. It will automatically kick us off, or we can exit, and then the same link that you got into this interview with, we'll just re-up that. The same link applies. You can click it and I'll meet you right back here.
Perfect.
But when we're talking about groups like Helinski's Hope, for example, when they do on-campus outreach, how important is that for the individual athlete who may not exactly know how to define what they're feeling?
Exactly. It was a really cool experience because it was something that our athletic department, I don't want to use the word force, but it was a mandatory thing that we had to attend. And what was so great about that and the feedback I've gotten from other student athletes about it was some of them wouldn't, if it was optional, they wouldn't have gone because they wouldn't want anyone to know that they were struggling in that way. But in this situation, we were all in the same room talking about the same hard things to talk about. And it was kind of normalizing that topic of conversation, which prior hasn't, we haven't normalized, and putting us all in a room together and kind of helping us realize that we're all going through very similar things. It was huge. It was huge for us to realize, I think, I know as a team, it's kind of where we realized that softballs shouldn't be our entire life. There's way more of us. We're more than an athlete. We are human before we are an athlete. And I think that's kind of the first time that we were able to kind of step back and realize that.
Why do you think that, and I'm just going to talk D1, D2, D3.
Yeah.
Why do you think that these athletes are going through these mental health struggles? I mean, why are we seeing all of these athletes talk about these serious, I mean, like suicidal ideation is certainly not to be taken lightly.
It sounds like talking with someone might help.
Yeah.
Thanks.
My computer is talking to me. But I mean, why do you think that these student athletes are actively seeking these conversations?
Yeah, so I know from like speaking with my head coach, who kind of just like graduated a few years ago. So she's not fresh out of like she's fresh out of college. And she said we never talked about stuff like this. It wasn't a topic of conversation. The stigma was at like an all-time high. And I think once COVID hit and we were all left like time to think and time to kind of figure out what's going on. And I feel like COVID's when I kind of learned about what mental health was and kind of like other disorders and other things and the importance of mental wellness and mental well-being. I think people then started to reach out, kind of started to talk about it a little more. Like, this was my experience. And I think that's when other people are like, wait, no, I've experienced the same thing. I know I first kind of looked into mental health in athletics with Victoria Brown, or previously Victoria Garrick. She's incredible, but I watched her TED Talk and it all made sense. And she was showing the schedule of an athlete, and she was showing it in real time and showing how packed and how busy it is, and how like we've been told to just keep our head down and work, but we don't even have time to do the basic things that we need to do, like essentially sleep. And that's a lot of pressure to put on an athlete. And I think, I don't know if it's with our generation or the generation that we're in, it's been super easy to talk about. I haven't had fear of retaliation. I haven't had fear of being perceived as weak. When I reached out or when I started to share my story for the first time, I was confident that no matter what, that I'd be okay with it. And I don't think a few years ago, everyone would have been comfortable sharing that. Like, it was a very uncomfortable topic to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I mean, my podcast was spawned by the kind of mental health dialogue that started during COVID. I mean, and if you trace back a lot of these initiatives, they come out of people we've lost in the last 2, 3, 4 years. I mean, unfortunately, it's not a new topic, but the breadth of the dialogue has come in even the past 5 years. I mean, it's a completely different athletic landscape now than it was. I mean, I graduated college in 2019, and sports psych was really not a priority.
Yeah.
And I went to a D1 institution. I mean, it just wasn't really talked about.
No.
Like we had a counseling center for the entire university, but then within the athletic department, there was only one sports psychologist on staff for hundreds of student athletes.
That's what's incredible to me, is like
The ratio doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. There's not enough time for people to get in to see these people, especially with our like our time frame that we have. We probably have 30 minutes a day that we can carve out of our busy days to probably go see a sports psych. And a lot of us either we don't have the time to go access those resources, or they're not as easily accessible to where, oh, it's only accessible during when I have this class, but I have to go to this class and this class is more important. And in reality, that's not the way it should be. I think having easier access is kind of, I think it's kind of what's changed the game, is being able to, like, from these past few years, is making it more accessible has, I think, helped a lot.
When you see people reach out to you and to the words I wish I'd heard, what are they telling you? I mean, what's the feedback from you
So
sharing your story?
yeah, when I first shared my story, I had someone messaged me and said, this described my PTSD and what I feel exactly. Like, I had never been able to put it in words like this. Like, this made sense to me. I shared this with my therapist. Um, and that was when I first realized, holy crap, I'm not alone. I mean, I don't know anyone who's gotten hit in the head while pitching, like softball wise, the way I did. But I didn't realize how trauma in itself and PTSD in itself, there was something to relate to. It wasn't the accident itself, it was more the outcome of the accident. And then I went about sharing my story again, like my full story, kind of with full parts. And I had a lot of people from high school that I don't think I really talked to that much, or people from college that I didn't talk to that much, reached out to me saying how they related to a certain part of my story, and how, like, how did you get through this? Because I had been through something so similar and I hadn't been able to get out of it. Or being able, like, even with my teammates, I had the opportunity to share my story to its fullest with my teammates last year. And there's like some parts that I don't share on social media, but I shared with them. And it was a very vulnerable, emotional experience that kind of brought us all together and kind of made us realize the little pieces that we all share together. Um, but with the Words I Wish I Heard project, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. It's been super cool. Like, there's people that I have no, like, I don't know who they are at first, and I see them wearing my sweatshirt. Or I went to an event with like Resilience Rally, and they had their Resilience Run, like their big event every year, and I saw someone wearing my sweatshirt, and I looked and I was like, I don't know, like, that one, it felt like an I made it moment of like, wait, maybe something that I'm doing is benefiting people in a positive way that I didn't, like, in smaller ways that I didn't intend.
And you were the Victoria Garrick for other people.
Which is incredible because she's like one of my biggest idols of people I look up to. I love her so much.
But we have less than a minute.
Yeah.
I do have a couple more questions, so we'll pick this up. I'm gonna end this one and we'll meet back here. When you're looking at working through these individualized kind of mental health struggles, when you're not talking about toxic coaching behavior, you're not talking about drama within teammates, you're talking about something that I'm dealing with off diamond that is impacting my play. How do you get through that? What's the first thing that you focus on to move through it?
Yeah. So what's great about our coaching staff is we have a few mental health days that we get to take every semester, that if we are struggling, we tell our coaches and they'll tell our athletic trainer, make sure all the right people are notified, and we can take that day for ourselves. I know sometimes when I'm not at my best, like if I were to have softball practice this week, I wouldn't be able to do it. I, like, coming up on the anniversary of my event, I essentially can't function to this extent that I would normally be able to. And so knowing when I'm not mentally at my best, one, I do my best to leave what I'm going through off the field. I do my very best, but sometimes that can't happen. And it's kind of ironic because whenever I go through a depressive episode and I actually have practice, I perform better, because it seems like my heart rate slows down. My heart rate slows down. There's no emotion to it. And I actually pitch way better when I'm in a depressive episode. So I usually play through that. If there's a lot of kind of like stress and overwhelming Like say it's like a PTSD episode, as long as I communicate with my coaches, they give me the time and the space for me to take a step back. If it's take a step back, like, hey, if you need to go, you can go. If you need to go see your athletic, like our athletic trainer, go do that. Like, go do something that's going to benefit you and that's going to make you get back on track to we need you to be. Because you're not going to, if you're struggling and you show up to practice, you're not going to be able to give your best self. It's kind of just as simple as it is. And they want us to give our best selves. And so they kind of give us the space and allow us to take time back for ourselves. And we all struggle. And so our coaches have sometimes they implement like meditation before practice starts, or sometimes we do like gratitude journaling or gratitude, just like what we're thankful for, kind of take a little bit of a greater perspective, which in the beginning I wouldn't have ever thought that gratitude journaling, like this wouldn't help. It helps for me. It helps a ton. It's helped a lot for me. But we kind of do a little things and attempt to implement things here and there that kind of helps calm us down and give us what we need to do.
At the beginning of this podcast, when I wasn't exactly sure the kind of people I wanted to bring on, I was interviewing coaches, and not all of them were embracing the mental health dialogue from the teams that they were trying to lead to success.
Yeah.
And I just kept picking up on the fact that those who decided to prioritize mental health conversations and then adaptable team building things like meditation and team yoga, their teams were more successful. And I just thought that was such an interesting point of view from coaches. But then you as the athlete are also corroborating the fact that when you have a coach who prioritizes mental health, you end up happier.
Yeah. And I know that I've ended up, this is the greatest place that I could have ended up. Because this wasn't the coach that I was originally recruited under. I was recruited under a coach, I think 2 coaches ago. There's been a few coaching changes since I kind of got to college. And I'm not sure how they handled it. I think they probably would have handled it a little bit differently. But kind of what's been great about my coach is she's willing to learn and she's willing to grow with me as an athlete. She's willing to work with me to kind of make sure I'm at my best, but to also, like, we talk about ways in which that we can prioritize. This is what our focus is on this year, is prioritize mental health before it gets bad. Like, how are we going to prepare ourselves for when things get bad? Because when things get bad, we have a little bit less of control over it. We don't know. We don't have the tools that we need to succeed. Kind of preparing ourselves and making sure that we know of our resources beforehand and trying to come up with a good game plan as to how we're going to talk a little bit about mental health, but how we're going to make it easy to talk about. Because some people still aren't going to want to talk about it. And that's okay. That's very okay. But I went to a leadership conference a few weeks ago, and the one thing we talked about was in terms of mental wellness, there was like the scale, and it had to do with colors. And it had to do with like, how are you feeling today? And it was green was good. And it went like orange or light green, yellow, orange, red. And it had the list of the symptoms of like, of like depression, anxiety. It had different symptoms. And so you could classify what color you're in. And that is something that we're planning to implement this fall to see if it works, is we don't need to talk about it. If you don't want to talk about it, it's okay. But to know like what color you're at, like, let's simplify it. Like, if you're not good, that's okay. What can we do to help you? But we don't have to make it this big deal. We can just say, we can check in with our teammates. We can do certain little things like, hey, how are you doing? Like, and they give us a color and we can go based off that. And we know how to proceed based on that. And so we've been doing little tiny things to try to implement, to try to make this experience better for others. Because like I said, I was kind of forced into the whole seeking help. And we kind of want to make it easier for the people not forced and wanting to seek help, as opposed to getting so low that they need it.
What is the most impactful coping mechanism you've learned?
Yeah. So my bad coping mechanism that I have is I dissociate a lot. I kind of try to like exit myself from the world. I'm not actively there. It's not the greatest habit. We're working out of it in therapy. I'll let you know that. Um, but one of my favorite ones is I use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding method of 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste, and naming it. Naming things kind of just calms me down a little bit. I also use ice. Kind of regulates my nervous system a little bit more than anything else has. I've had a really good response to that, and it slows my like parasympathetic nervous system down. It slows all that down and helps me a ton. And then I think one of the other main ones that we're kind of learning and what I'm learning more to do better is box breathing and progressive muscle relaxation. I've been working through that in therapy. And I think it's a great tool to be able to use. And I kind of want other athletes to kind of like learn it because I think it's a great tool in the toolbox to have. But yeah, those are kind of the main ones that I use.
Yeah, when I was getting into my upper level sports psych classes, PMR fascinated me. It was so cool because I mean, I tend to store a lot of anxiety in like stress in my shoulders.
I'm right there
And
with you.
I mean, it was incredible to just focus on those specific parts of your body. And as an athlete, you're already so in tune with how your body feels.
Yeah.
I'm sure that that is a huge help.
Yeah, it really is. And you don't realize it either, which is why it's kind of like it was kind of cool to realize, oh, this is a tool that I could use. I can use it when I'm pitching because pitching still scares the crap out of me. I'm not gonna lie. I still have constant anxiety, and I'm actually going through trauma therapy right now for the first time, which has been a very difficult, hard process. But we've kind of realized how much it still affects me and how much I'm like still not like I've talked about it a lot, and that's helped a ton. But how it still constantly fills my brain. But these tools that we've been using, like being able to box breathe, being able to kind of catch my thoughts before I'm able to turn them into emotions and feelings, has been really big. And I feel like just in general, like these are good life skills to have that we're not essentially taught. But yeah.
Why did you go into trauma therapy? Was it because of what we've already discussed?
So yes, it was originally for the accident that I had. I've been with the same therapist now for 2 years. She kind of came on when I was struggling, like kind of at my lowest, and she's kind of been with me through that process. And she recently got CPT certified. Um, and so, and also this past year, I redshirted due to an injury. So we kind of were like, hey, this is a great time for you to like, let's get to the bottom of this. Like, I know it still affects you. I know it still bothers you. I know you're not like it's still an active thought in your head every time you pitch. And so we started about a month ago, and I can already tell it's going to help eventually. It's hard to see that now, but there's little things that I've been able to learn and catch on that have been extremely helpful.
At the very beginning of a therapy journey,
Mhm.
is there a point when you are unconvinced that it's going to work?
Oh yeah. Um, the first therapist I saw, I didn't connect with at all. Um, she was outside of school, like it was an outside of school provider. She didn't understand what softball was. She didn't understand the sport I play. She didn't really understand the way I was thinking. And so I didn't connect with her at all. And it took a while for me to find the therapist that I have now and to be able to connect with her the way I have now. It took a really long time. And so I think throughout that process, I was like, this isn't going to work. Like, why am I going to begin with? But then it became an outlet for me. It became an outlet to talk about things that were happening in my life and things that I was emotionally torn over, or it was like an outsider's perspective on things that are going on in my life and how to adequately like control my emotions and control the thoughts and feelings that surrounded them. And that's when I kind of realized, wait, I should have been doing this a long time ago. Like I should have started doing this when I was younger. I wish I learned this when I was younger. I wish they taught this in school. I wish this was a priority, instead of some of the other things that they teach. I wish we learned how to control our emotions or learned how to talk about them at least a little bit. Um, but yeah, there was a long period of time where I didn't think it was going to work until after I had like the horrible fall. I realized how much it was going to help me.
Is there anything else that you think that I missed about your interview?
I don't think so.
Okay, yay. Any other questions that you have about the process? I'm going to look up when your interview is going to be published. It'll be a while. We're super backed up with content right now. I'm so excited. Like,
I love that for you. That's amazing.
It's the worst problem it's the best problem to have,
Yeah.
But is there any other questions you have for me?
I don't think so.
Remember when I said that it was backed up? Your episode is not going to be live until September 20th.
That's okay. That's awesome. That is awesome for you.
Yeah, it's really been an incredible experience. I mean, I do weekly episodes, and I mean, that is a story every week. Someone's story is being shared every week.
I think that's cool.
I mean, like, it's not something I take lightly. I love these people. I love every single one of you guys. But like, it's so interesting to talk to people across the country, across the world, different sports, different ages. I mean, some people are just at the beginning of their careers, some are transitioning from college into pro, some are leaving their professional careers, and everyone is struggling.
Yeah.
I mean, your story is just unique in its own right, but there are also at the same time a thousand of you who are struggling with exactly what we have talked about.
Exactly.
And I don't think that I'll ever run out of people who
I don't think you will.
Who want to share their stories, who want to make a difference. And the feedback from this podcast, from literally every episode, has been thank you for sharing my story. Because like, the stories that I tell are not mine.
Yeah.
Like, they're very personal to you. I mean, they are some of the lowest parts of my guests' lives. And sometimes it's hard to talk about that. And so I always thank my guests, like, thank you for being so vulnerable. I'm so honored to get to tell your story, and thanks for hanging out with me.